Hello, and welcome to Balanced and Blissful Energies podcast. I am your host, Dr. Elizabeth Echevarria, and today I am very grateful to have with me Mr. Murphy Monroe. Murphy is a speaker, writer, and sensory wellness advocate whose journey bridges the worlds of art, healing, and embodiment. Murphy is the longtime executive director of the Actors Gymnasium, a nationally treasured circus school and theater company in Evanston, Illinois. He's also the owner of a float therapy spa just outside of Chicago, where he's spent thousands of hours, in sensory deprivation, not just as a practice, but as a portal for transformation. Proudly autistic, and I understand you were diagnosed at 40 years of age, deeply attuned to the unseen intelligence of the body. Murphy's work explores how stillness can become sacred, how nervous system regulation can lead to revelation, and how slowing down can reconnect us to our deepest truths. He's here today to share his path from masking and performance to presence and integration, and to invite us into a conversation about what it really means to heal, listen, and remember who we are. Welcome, Murphy.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm really pleased to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And, so I, when I found you on this interface, I thought, wow, what a fantastic story, because, I'm a pediatrician, have been for over 20 years now. And when I was training, we were just starting to have many more of these diagnoses of autism. And again, it was like a diagnosis. So it was like something that was wrong and had to be treated medically. And this always it struck me as, well, is it really so wrong? And what is the extent of things? Because there's a huge spectrum, right, that has been described. And of course, as a pediatrician, I've seen the extreme spectrum probably more often than I've seen the mild spectrum, because the extreme spectrum presents with very challenging things for parents, where there's self-harm and this sort of thing. But I want to explore today the end of the spectrum, where, like you were just diagnosed when you were 40, and it's a whole lifetime of learning how to cope or how to be. And I've read that you felt, in a way, once you had this diagnosis, it was like almost tell us, what was it like when you were first diagnosed? What did it give you permission for, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So, from my earliest possible memories, I knew that I was different than everybody around me. It's just absolutely, like, clear to my core in a foundational way that the people around me, whether it was my family, or friends or people in the neighborhood or people on TV, I just knew that they all were experiencing something different than I was experiencing. They were all connected to each other in a way that I didn't understand or know how to even approach at all. And they all clearly were acting without any kind of filter. They were just sort of naturally being and exchanging and laughing and doing all sorts of things, touching each other maybe. And I just knew that none of that was natural to me, or I had a framework to even begin to understand it. And this, to me, from the youngest age I can remember, was a really scary thought, because I knew that I was really different. And it's pretty obvious, even at a young age in our society, that people who are really different are exercised, are, treated as other. And when it comes to mental health, people who are really different are often institutionalized
Mm.
or taken out of the mainstream altogether. And so, I was a kid whose parents were educators and intellectuals. And from the earliest age, this difference in me was a secret, was like a big, big secret that I couldn't ever let anybody in on. I didn't want people to know how different I was and what I was experiencing was um, would be completely foreign to me, to them, from their own experiences, and I didn't want anyone to know. And so I just went into hiding. I worked really hard to fit in. I worked really hard to try to hold my body in such a way, try to present myself in such a way that nobody would know my secret. This meant even in school as a kid, I had no hope of learning in school. I had no hope of hearing what the teacher said. I had no hope of being able to read a full paragraph of text and know what I had just read. But what I was able to get myself to do was sit in a chair, look forward, and not say too much. But just the act of doing that took everything I had in me just to achieve the act of sitting forward and making the teacher think that I was listening and learning. And so as I grew older and older, this secret was still in my head. I was still very aware of it. Um, but it wasn't until my early 20s that I came across Temple Grandin and read about autism and her experience. And although I wasn't ready to say, hey, that's me, I certainly had never connected with something quite so much as the experience that she described. And then about 10 years ago now, I just became really obvious to me that I was working way harder than I should have to in order to cope. And it was really causing a price. It was causing a physical price. And I just really felt like I hit a wall. And that's when I decided I was going to go get diagnosed. And I knew I was autistic in many ways, but I wanted to sit down with a professional and have them tell me. And, the diagnosis process is in many cases several weeks, and I did a bunch of pre-testing, but really within about an hour of sitting down with her, her reaction to me was, gosh, Murphy, like, you must know that you're autistic. Um, and so those are the words. Just hearing that, a professional now saying, yes, you do have this specific kind of brain. Yes, like inside your head is a brain wiring that is different than the brain wiring of other people around you. And that this sense of difference I've had since the beginning is real and is natural. Um, and I've never had such a release as came from that information. All of a sudden, I had a new label for myself. I could get rid of so many labels that had put on me and I had accepted over the years, whether those labels are lazy or rude or flip or, um, unable to comprehend so many things that just were not me. Um, and I just now had permission to step into the world and say I'm autistic and I can't be here unless we do these things to make it possible for me to be here. And since then, I've lived a um, just a radically different life. And knock on wood, maybe I'll even live a little bit longer than I otherwise would, having this sense of levity and this sense of authenticity that just wasn't available to me
Mm.
before, particularly in my body, particularly in the way I hold my body.
Yeah. Wow. And so I want to loop in because you just said yeah, being in your body and holding how you hold yourself in your body. How did the floating experience, how did you discover floating, and how did that experience influence how you hold yourself in your body?
Yeah. So just for your listener's sake, floating is a practice called sensory deprivation that is the idea of creating a completely sensory-free environment with absolutely no sensory input whatsoever, including gravity. And so the way this is done is 10 inches of water heated precisely to skin temperature and then filled with so much magnesium sulfate or Epsom salt that the water becomes completely buoyant. One lays on top of the water with the head below, with their ears below the surface of the water, cutting off all sound. And then the air above the water also gets heated precisely to skin temperature. So now we have air, body, and water that are all blended into a single atmosphere. Then we turn off the lights and get rid of all sound, get rid of all smell. And in that environment, the body's not able or the brain's not able to feel the water after a while because the water, the air, and the body are the same temperature, and the eyes can't see the water. And so it goes away. And one is in an absolutely sensory-free environment. No smell, no touch, no gravity, completely neutral state of being. And I discovered this as something that I did it many, many years ago, but it was really about 10 years ago now that a float center opened in my hometown. And then I went to right upon opening. The reason I was drawn to it, my whole life, especially as a kid, I really liked dark, quiet, anonymous places. So like if there was a closet and I could get in the closet and close the doors and then get behind all of the clothes in the closet back into the corner, that just to me felt like a great place. Or even in between a box spring and a mattress, just lying there with the pressure of both between me and a sense of anonymity and a sense of being alone in many ways. And so the float tank was really natural place for me to be. Um, and what it did for me, I mean, the first thing it did is that I heard my heartbeat. And so I know that that's an unusual thing to hear. But yeah, I was really 40 years old when I actually understood my heartbeat and heard it and connected my brain to the idea that there really is this thing inside me that really is beating, that really is pumping blood. Prior to this, I had gone through actor training and had done a lot of breath work and trained in the Linkletter technique of breathing and connecting with your diaphragm. And that entire time, I was just pretending like I knew what my diaphragm was or that I was in some way connected to it. But in the float tank, after many hours of stillness in there, all of a sudden my diaphragm appeared and I realized my lungs and I felt my lungs and I realized that my lungs were doing the real thing that I've always intellectually been told they're doing, but these were mine and I could sense it and I knew what my diaphragm was. And then on and on from there, my body revealed itself to me. Um, and I came in connection, changing my posture, changing my gait, changed so many aspects of how I would go through the world because now I was a complete person. I was tied to a body that I just had never been in touch with before.
Yeah. So I have studied anthroposophic medicine, and I don't know if you know anything about anthroposophy and the concepts, Murphy.
I don't. I don't
Okay.
know much about it. Please do.
Yeah. So it's this, there are four layers, you could say, to the human. First, you have the physical body. Then you have the etheric body or the vital force body. Yeah. Then, and that runs the entire physical, it makes everything function, all the processes work. Then there's the astral body, which contains your emotional and mental, it's basically the personality soul part of us. And then beyond that is the I, the more spiritual I as opposed to the ego I, the small ego I,
Yes. Yes.
which ideally everything that we do is informed by that I, but we get to know that I over time, right? So when you're small, you're not really in touch. You are, but you're not really being so directed. You're working on growing and developing and playing and all of those things. And one of the things about from that perspective that we conceptualize for children with autism is that their full incarnation into their bodies is not complete, so to speak. I mean, it is, but it's in a way that connection is a little bit not fully in. And there's a lot of anthroposophic therapies that are given and stuff to help with that. But what you just mentioned about as a 40-year-old suddenly feeling connecting with your heartbeat, connecting with your lungs, connecting with your diaphragm, that really rings a bell for that concept that in fact maybe it's true. And would you agree that in your younger years you didn't feel fully embodied?
Certainly. I definitely did not feel fully embodied. And so, like all things on the autism spectrum, there's a spectrum, right? And so I think of interoception, and there is a spectrum of autistic folks who either have really strong wiring between quadrants or have weak wiring between quadrants that ultimately is putting them in the spectrum of interoception, with some people having incredibly keen awareness of their body to the point where it's painful,
Mm.
and other people having apraxia, where they have absolutely zero connection between mind and body, don't even know that there are arms hanging there, or that those arms that are hanging there are their arms. And it's a spectrum, with some having extreme hyper skills in this way and others the opposite. And so um, for me, no doubt I've always had very low interoception. I've, it's, not fun to talk about, but more or less was incontinent as a kid, just because I had absolutely no idea when I did or didn't need to go to the bathroom. I still don't really know when I'm hot or cold. My wife will tell me I'm going to get sick days before I have any idea that I might be sick. Um, and so it's as a kid I was disembodied. I remember I liked theater. Theater was a safe, fun place to be, but the idea of choreography or the idea of holding your body still, much less moving your legs or arms in a directed pattern, was just beyond any kind of thing I was capable of or even knew how to try, to be honest. So I pretended. And I was bad at it. And I think for a lot of people like that, you don't mind being bad at things as long as they don't think the reason you're bad at it is because I was autistic, right? I just hope they thought I had bad coordination or, whatever it was. Anything of those was way better than people thinking that I was as fundamentally different as I knew I was.
And from that, so you knew that you were fundamentally different, but now how do you perceive this sensory sensitivity? Do you perceive it more as a gift or as a burden? And especially with respect to your spiritual journey, and we can start going down that direction. Yeah.
Thanks. So, uh, is it a gift or a burden? I don't like thinking of things as a burden, but I don't think it's a gift. And so I guess I would put it there. I don't feel burdened by it, but the thing I do feel burdened by is how difficult society makes it to be that way. I feel burdened by that. I was really burdened by an educational system that wasn't interested in the kind of learner that I was. And, I've been burdened in those ways, but I'm not burdened um, by my autism or by my lack of interoception. And unfortunately, I think it's taken me longer to get to my spiritual journey than maybe it would have otherwise, if I was going to be really honest about it. I have been on a spiritual path since the very beginning, and really interested in the big questions and really interested in understanding why both our society at large and individual people make so many choices that are contrary to what is the obvious good. Um, and so all of that led me into a great spiritual interest and a deep desire to be connected to the divine, is the best word I have for it. And so um, I think I attended a lot of, as a young person, particularly college and then beyond, I would go to different religious services on the regular. I love the idea of a community gathering of neighbors who take a step away from everything else to just breathe together, sing together, read whatever it is. I just, to me, it's one of the more beautiful parts of our society, those types of gatherings in the name of something larger than ourselves. Um, but I never found my own clear connection to God and never understood God the way I wished to. Um, I eventually found my way towards the Quakers. And I did this simply because the Quakers have a practice of um, worshiping in silence, and an interest in not having any one person part of the group who might be closer to God than any other person in the group, um, but having a communal um, experience. And so what they do is Quakers just sit together, um, and they listen. And what they're listening for is some kind of nudge, some kind of push, some kind of information. For some of them, it's directly from God. For some of them, it's coming in some other way. But they're literally just spending an hour listening and then sharing with each other in the most earnest way what, if anything, they've heard.
Mm.
And um, that's what clicked for me. You know, I've spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, in stillness in the back of a closet, in darkness, trying to be alone, to connect with myself, and doing what I thought was meditation. But something really clicked when I just turned that time into listening, rather than listening to myself or my own thoughts, or rather than trying not to think or to think. I just turned to listening to the universe, listening to my house creak, to God. Um, and that's really what brought me to a very different kind of spiritual centeredness. Because when one does that active listening in everyday life, when one does that active listening in nature, when one does that active listening when they're with somebody else in need, um, God does reveal itself.
Mm.
The divine does reveal itself. And this has happened for me. That's the float tank has now become my portal for that. The place I really want to be most is just in a place of complete neutrality, um, where I can just listen and try my best to be connected to the consciousness that I am now convinced is all around us all of the time. And yeah, it was really just simply that little click of now I'm going to listen, because there is something way bigger, way more important, way more profound, way more divine happening. There's no way of denying it. And maybe all we have to do is just slow down, and with a very open heart. Um, just listen, just listen.
So yes, listening and with an open heart is
Yeah,
absolutely
yes.
very good advice for everyone, no matter neurodivergent or not. It always starts with an open heart. And I'm curious about this. When we think about consciousness, because you said consciousness is everywhere. Absolutely, I 100% agree with you. And what is it about consciousness and this shifting in how we perceive our experiences? So from, the normie way to people within what we label as the autistic spectrum disorder, whatever, autism spectrum.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, do you think that within this spectrum, there is a possibility of evolution, some kind
Oh,
of, yeah.
so um, I love that suggestion, and I don't just think it so. I know it so. Um, one of the stereotypes that people don't like about autism is that it comes with some kind of like superpower or super genius skills. Um, because it doesn't always, or when it does, they aren't always obvious or clear. But we know for certain that savant skills appear amongst the autistic community just in a way more profound and way more common than in any other community. And that existence of savant skills, of course, also runs a spectrum. Many of us remember, watching Rain Man back in the 80s, a movie that showed Dustin Hoffman counting 1,000 toothpicks on the ground with perfect accuracy because his brain just allowed him to do that. And that's a real thing. And we all know about people who are born with a capacity for musical skill. That is clearly something that has been learned. They understand music in a really complex way without having ever been exposed to music at all. And there's these savant skills that absolutely do exist. And I believe one of the places that they exist most richly um, is in what I'm just going to call. I wish we had better words, but in what most people would call extrasensory perception,
Mhm.
in the ability to communicate, to feel, to understand, in a way that is profoundly different than hearing or listening or smelling or touching, a different kind of understanding that can come through a different, what I would call a different connection to that consciousness.
Mhm.
That consciousness is all around us. Our brains are filtering that consciousness, and then our brains are telling our bodies what to do with that consciousness. And I think that there is likely a different filter that happens on differently wired brains, or maybe that consciousness is accessible in ways that are profoundly different than what we would just normally think of or understand, the kind of ways that we'd have to lean into science fiction or lean into original forms of spirituality to actually um, start to fully embrace and understand. I believe this. I don't just believe this. I know this. This particularly happens amongst nonverbal, the nonverbal community. And
Mhm.
again, we don't want to stereotype anybody. Not all nonverbal people with autism have necessarily any kind of additional perceptive skills, but we know that many do. And we don't just know this in recent history, we know this throughout history. And it's not something science has wanted to accept. It has a lot of consequences for the materialists that come along with these types of concepts. But we know them to be real. And I don't know if you said the word evolution earlier. I think you might have. Um, and it is, to me, autism is necessary to evolution. That there is nothing wrong with the autistic brain. In fact, there is something right about the autistic brain and something needed in order for us to fully understand um, not just the human experience, but the divine experience.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I think of it as necessary to evolution. I think there's a lot of people who live difficult lives as autistic, perhaps trapped in bodies that they haven't figured out how to connect with, and living inside of a society that gives up on them really quick um, and makes public places hard for them to be in. Um, but yeah, to me, it is absolutely a potential for a much larger spiritual connection that I do think profoundly exists in that kind of brain wiring.
Yeah. Yeah. In my conception, understanding of, where can we gather all of this information from, that, to be able to, so in an instant count 1,000 toothpicks on the ground, for instance. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
instant knowing, just like,
Yes.
I've developed my intuition, and actually I always had it, but I
Hmm.
ignored it. And now that I'm
Hmm.
focusing on it and purposefully growing it, it's 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 basically claircognizance. You
Yes.
just know. And
Yes.
and it's allowing for that uh connection to, some people call it the Akash, whatever. It's the information that is consciousness that is everywhere and, you know, in us, all around us. Like, we can't really put a place to it. It just is. And so that's why I agree with you that this, you know, this transition as humans are evolving, because this obviously is a process that's going to take many years and generations, but we're certainly feels like we're in an accelerated stage. And especially even when it comes with interfacing with computers, with artificial intelligence, and all of the how quickly that has developed has also changed how we think.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
in some ways, like, I think the kind of, I don't have the kind of brain that can program. That's that's not the way my brain works. But I have met people who are, incredible programmers, and like, everybody has
Yeah.
their own little
Yeah. Yep.
special connection to that
Yes.
consciousness. um and it's yeah, it's beautiful to see us all going through this evolution together. And I'm fully with you that we need to create spaces that are less um violent to the senses, shall
Right.
we
Right.
say.
Yes. It's a great way
Yeah.
to say it. You
Yeah.
know, I love what you've just said about artificial intelligence because by my thinking, artificial intelligence provides a framework for all the rest of us to understand natural intelligence. And that's what you've described, this cognizance, this way of knowing, this way of being connected. You didn't, these aren't your words, these are my words, but this way of being connected to all that has been, all that is. Um, and that's natural intelligence. And it's like all around us, and it includes all intelligence. And the human brain is capable of connecting to it. And in my mind, it's sort of just either the exact same or the exact opposite of artificial intelligence. It's this collection. of all of this intelligence that we've now created a computer that's able to connect to and filter it back to us. And right, our brains have the same ability to filter and bring back to us natural intelligence.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful um, that maybe that's what artificial intelligence does for us, is it allows pathways. This may be horribly naive to what I'm saying, I understand, but that it allows pathways for us to have natural intelligence. Um, and cognizance and knowing. And as soon as that happens, then all of a sudden it becomes obvious that there's people all around us who are suffering and
Mm.
who have basic needs that we all have the capacity to fill.
Hmm.
Um, and that's my hope for that's my hope for it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there is so much that we can do more of. And especially, I'm an Aquarian, so I have a very optimistic future view about what humanity can achieve. Um, and in my optimistic view, AI is going to be something that, or already is starting to be something that will free us to create more uh, abundance in a way that is, not the zero sum game that it is now. You know, that we're all able. I mean, because Mother Earth has enough to feed everyone on this planet, and right now, so many humans are doing things that are harmful to them and to the planet. And the more that we can become aware of all of the interconnections that we naturally have between each other and the planet, the more that, our internet, our AI, all of this reflects back to us what we're doing versus what is possible, the better we can make choices, more informed, better
Yes.
choices. And yeah, that's my optimistic view, that we stop tuning into the bad news and
Yeah.
yeah, make our future that what we want. Yeah.
Yep. I feel similarly. And it's going to tell us things, and you can't unknow what you know.
Mhm.
And in many ways, once we know that everybody can be helped, once we know that there are ways to take care of people, there are ways to distribute wealth differently, and distribute resources differently is a better way to say that. Once we know those things, then we can't unknow them. Um, and hopefully, that level of information, that level of understanding to the people, um, yeah, is revolutionary.
Yeah,
That's sure what we need it to be.
absolutely. We're gonna make it happen.
Yeah,
There's people like you and me out there making it happen. It's gonna happen. The more the merrier.
trying.
Great. So, wanted to ask you also, from your experience, because you've had a lot of experience, with we didn't even touch on your performance and the circus and all of the other stuff that you do that has to do with embodiment as well. Maybe another day. But what practices can you offer our audience who want to begin listening more to their bodies?
Yeah, this is something I talk to people about a lot because I'm in a position at the Sensory Deprivation Center to help ease people into this space. Um, and a lot of the folks there are people who want to be in the space to process trauma, firefighters, veterans, and it's a hard space for them to try to be into, that space of stillness, that space of aloneness, because there's a desire to, fight our left brain, um, and a desire to um, keep the activity alive, to just keep the space full, to keep the emptiness full of something, some thought, some energy, some movement. And it's a hard thing to break through. it's a really hard thing to allow yourself um, to do this. And so the practice that I take on, and the thing I advise people to do, is to just make it a practice of listening to your left brain. And so make it a practice to listen to it and to say to yourself, okay, there's my left brain, and here's what my left brain is saying right now, and look at it go. And isn't it active? And isn't it great? And isn't it amazing that I can spin off all of these thoughts so fast? And the more that I do this, and the more that I build awareness to my brain and to the kind of thinking my brain is doing, well, then the more I slowly rise above myself. And the more I start to be able to say, well, geez, if I'm thinking about my thoughts, well, then, geez, those thoughts must be at a layer below where I am right now, because I'm able to judge my thoughts. I'm able to think about my thoughts in real time. So those must be sub thoughts. And so all of a sudden I start to realize that what my left brain is doing, I'm able to observe. And if I'm able to observe, I'm able to control. And then there's that gap we have to find where we move from observer to controller. And to me, that's where the real work lies, in between becoming an observer of our thoughts to becoming someone who's able to let those thoughts relax,
Mm,
and who's able to let that all fade into the background. And to me, that pathway is awareness.
mhm,
That pathway is owning those thoughts. That pathway is recognizing that those thoughts are your thoughts, that they exist for a reason, likely because we're defending ourselves from something, or we're trying to inhibit some kind of feeling that we are fearful of having. But the more we observe our thoughts, the more we realize our thoughts are our thoughts, the more we realize there's a reason for those thoughts, the more we start to quiet those thoughts. And then it's in the quieting of that, it's in the putting those things in the background where stillness happens. And we talked earlier about that other eye, not our ego eye, but that other eye. It becomes apparent
mhm.
in that space, and it reveals itself. And, I don't know if that's practical or not, but that's my best advice, is to just work to accept those thoughts, become an observer of them, and to own them, even to love them. Um, and then they'll quiet on their own.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice to even love them because I know that a lot of beginning and even very experienced meditators struggle with this um, letting go of the thoughts or not thinking. And if we can just accept, okay, those are my thoughts, there they are. I love my thoughts, but I don't have to be thinking them all the time.
That's right. That's right.
And then this point of awareness and stillness also allows you to be a more powerful creator of your life because then you have more choice about
Hmm.
what
Yes.
thoughts you're going to think and what those thoughts are going to lead to because it's thought, feeling, and action.
Yes. And then when we're in any kind of point where we're making a decision, which is every point, we are making that decision from a much more natural place, a place that is much more likely to lend to a natural intrinsic decision.
Yeah, yeah. Aligned, an aligned decision.
Yes, aligned decision. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Absolutely right. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
Great. Wow, that's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you, Murphy.
I've enjoyed it so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. So I actually wanted to give you an opportunity also for you to share with the audience, if, where they can reach you or, yeah, all of
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah. So I have a website that folks can find me at. It's murphymonroe.com, MurphyMonroe. You can learn all about the various things I do there. You can also contact me directly from there, and I'm very open to hearing from anyone that I've touched or has thoughts or questions or may want to work with me. Also on my website, you can learn about some of the work I do, which is helping organizations, both governmental and private businesses, to think about their workplaces and their workforces from a sensory inclusive perspective. And that's something I really enjoy doing and also always interested in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Murphy, and
Absolutely.
wish you a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for your work with the neurodivergent and autistic community to help support better working spaces. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.